Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your unfiltered fit BFF, mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify their fitness journey so they can lose weight, regain their confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Let's go. Hello there, fam. We're here today with Dr. Aparna Iyer. Dr. Aparna Iyer, she completed her residency training in psychiatry at Albany Medical Center in New York, where she was selected as a chief resident and then continued on to work as an assistant professor and faculty member. Dr. Iyer also was an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. And you also have been one of the magazine's best doctor in Dallas and best doctor in Collin County. And now you have a private practice in Frisco, which is right next door in Texas, by the way. And that's where she sees patients and has really focused on reproductive psychiatry. Welcome, Aparna.
Thank you.
I'm going to call you Aparna. Is that okay?
Totally fine.
Okay. Because I know I'm going to get myself in a twist with Dr. Iyer with all the R's, and that's going to be a mess. Aparna, thank you so much did I miss anything? Was that a good intro?
No, that was a perfect intro.
Cool. Awesome.
Maybe one of the things that you and I were talking about was you mentioned reproductive psychiatry. That might be a place to start to talk about what that is.
Love that. Okay. So what exactly is reproductive psychiatry?
So reproductive psychiatry really focuses in on the mental health of women. It specifically hones in on some of the mental health challenges around some of the reproductive things that women go through. And that can look like anything. It can look like women earlier on or throughout the course of their lifespans struggling with some of the emotional pieces around their menstrual cycles, could deal with infertility, mental health challenges during pregnancy, postpartum, delivery, breastfeeding. But it's not just that. There are other components to it too. We have a lot of women who struggle with pregnancy losses and some of the grief and emotional challenges around that, maybe some postpartum pieces. And then we also have women who, after all of that is said and done, are struggling with some of the emotional challenges around menopause and some of those changes as well. So I'm really here for all of it. Any emotional support that you need through any of those pieces, I'm kind of there to support my patients.
Okay. So you specialize, especially with all of that, would you say that you specialize primarily in females, or would you have some male patients as well?
So I will say that I have a very balanced practice. I love that about my practice. So I love to have a broad spectrum. And one of my big things about my practice is trying to create an inclusive space, meeting people where they're at, no matter who they are and what their struggles are. Mm-hmm. So the reproductive part of my practice is definitely a branch of my practice, but I do see male patients and all kinds of different people in other areas of practice as well.
I love that because that's interesting to know that, because it's going to be relevant for a question that I'm going to be asking in a little bit. So you work on that area of your practice with mothers. Yes. A lot of them, not necessarily, but the majority would be mothers, be that adoptive mothers or somebody who has given birth or all of that. So what do you see moms struggle the most when it comes to their mental health after having, especially their first child?
It's a loaded question. How much time? Yeah. If we have a couple hours, let me give you some common concerns. Yeah. First-time moms have. And, you and I have both been there as well. So when I speak about this, I may be speaking in some part to both of our experiences as well. But commonly, I'll see that moms really struggle with the transition I don't think that people really say it as it is. And so this is where ancient wisdom comes in. We've lost our villages, right? So you don't necessarily have people who come in and say, hey, this is going to be really beautiful and meaningful and amazing, but it's also going to be a little bit crazy and hard. And sometimes you're going to feel sad, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to regret kids, and that's okay. There are ugly pieces, and we take it all as like a big package of this next step of your life. So the transition from not being a mom to being a mom, there are good, bad, and ugly parts to it. And I think that moms really benefit from having someone to say, that's okay. It's okay. You're not expected to be perfect. It is going to be a little bit of a struggle. It's okay. We're here to kind of support you through it. I think that there are components too, that a lot of times moms have this fixed notion of what it means to be a mom, and it can be really challenging to flex around that. And I'll give you an example. You might laugh when you hear this because I'm sure you were there. I was definitely there. Before I had kids, I was like, I would look around so judgmental. The moms were like, oh, look at those kids on the iPads at the
I feel attacked.
look at them. Moms, I'm going to be a better mom than them because 0 screen time. Guess what I do now at the restaurants?
iPads.
Right? 100%. And the idea that when we have a fixed notion of what it means to be an all-in dedicated mother, and then we change our plans or change because it's not sustainable, it's not working for us, that we somehow feel like there's a betrayal to ourselves or betrayal to our kids, or this notion of what it means to be a good mom. I'm selling myself short. I'm somehow a lesser mom to my kids. And that could be further from the truth.
I don't even know where to begin saying like how much I love every single word that you said. And that's basically what I like. That's the overview that I wanted. I know that it was a loaded question, but that's kind of the overview that I was wanting to hear. And it's funny because after I had my son, everybody's like, you look on social media and everybody's like, oh, I just had my baby. I love him so much. And it's like this beautiful thing. And then I'm like, people gave me a baby and then they're like, off you go. And I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
And like, there is like this idea that there is going to be this love that takes over your body. And I'm like, I didn't feel that. And I'm like, am I broken? Like, is there something wrong with me?
People feel, I will tell you that like many moms that I see, I think I had a sense of connection with my first one, who's also a son. I had a sense of connection with him. I felt this feeling of needing to protect him. But I wouldn't say that I looked at him and said, oh, I feel so much deep love for this kid until he was about 3 months old.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. So what, and now whenever we're talking about, let's start from the beginning with, like the beginning of the postpartum stage. You have the baby and we know about the conditions that can come after, the postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. And I even heard you say somewhere else about postpartum OCD, which I found very interesting. So what are the things, and I even hate using this word, but I don't know how else to ask. What are the things that are quote unquote normal? And what are the things that a new mom should be paying attention to look for professional help?
That's a very, very good question. I think, let me start by saying that you really don't need a diagnosis or you don't need to be suffering in order to seek professional help. Even if you were to say, I don't know, I feel a little under the weather, or this is a hard transition, or, my husband and I can't seem to get on the same page. We're not headed for a divorce. We just can't seem to communicate right. It's okay. Low threshold. Get some professional help. Just because you seek it doesn't mean you need to be in it forever. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like, what is a normal postpartum experience? This is the challenge. Let me explain to you why. Because, for example, if you look at typical symptoms of depression, low energy, low motivation, feeling kind of moody or dysphoric, crying spells, what new mom do you know that has high energy, high motivation, right? Like it just doesn't happen. So I think there's a lot of crossover in terms of newborn experience, like new mom experiences and some of the typical signs of depression. Further confounding that is that postpartum blues is very common. And about 80% of moms experience it. It's really lasts for about 2 weeks where you're just feeling out of sorts, But once it extends beyond that 2-week mark, and especially if your functionality drops and you start feeling like you can't function at all, you start having really dark or depressive, suicidal thoughts, things like that. I mean, you need to seek help immediately. But I think that really, when we're looking at postpartum depression, I think I look at more at each individual case and say, okay, is this person struggling? Are the family members also coming in and saying, this is not who she is? This is so uncharacteristic of her. She's racked with recurrent feelings of sadness and guilt. Her mood is always low. She can't seem to function. She can't seem to bond with the baby. She's always angry. She's always crying. It's to the point where her functioning levels have dropped and maybe even flatlined. Then we're really looking at getting some professional help as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I love that. And that's kind of now my question that at the beginning, whenever you said that you have a very diverse practice, that's where my question now comes into play because, it is hard for a partner. I was not a very nice pregnant lady. I can tell you that much. I was a mess. And I was not very pleasant to be around. My husband deserves a trophy for putting up with me. So how can a partner support their wife or girlfriend or whatever it is who just had who just had a baby and not lose themselves in the process? Because I'm sure that it's hard for them too to navigate that new stage of becoming a parent and having to support their partner who might be struggling with mental health.
So I'm really glad we're talking about this for a number of reasons. I think that the data really has focused a lot on postpartum depression and anxiety in moms, as it should. But I think it's come at the cost also of, we really haven't had a lot of data on postpartum depression in dads. So to your point, the transition and the mental health challenges can be seen in moms, but also can be seen in partners. It's really, really hard. And then when you have two people who have their own unique struggles and challenges with this transition and nobody's sleeping, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about how do you support this new mom, but also maybe how do we support each other, right?
Yeah. And is this something that, for example, they should obviously look for the help if it is a matter of getting help from medication, which we're going to get into that in a little bit, and counseling. Is this something that they should look at doing individually, together as a couple, both? Like from your experience, what is it that you find to be the most effective?
I think it depends on a case by case basis. So I think that individual counseling can be really, really helpful. I think it depends on, though, what is the specific challenge. I'll give you some examples. Sometimes we'll have like blended families and then the partners have a biological child, but it's a whole family who's struggling with transition on multiple levels. Well, maybe we need family therapy in that case. Mm-hmm. Or maybe individually we're struggling, but our primary issue is that we can't seem to get on the same page since we've had this baby. Well, maybe at that point you're doing more couples therapy, but it doesn't necessarily need to be an either or situation. People I find often will start with one and then also add in another one. So maybe I start seeing a therapist and then my husband looks at me and says, wow, you're thriving. I need some of that. And so then they'll go in and start his therapy. And then at some point, maybe we kind of mix some couples counseling or marriage counseling in there as well, just so that we make sure that all around we stay on track with our health.
And I know, I love that. And I know that you briefly touched a little bit on the identity shift. And that's something that I personally experienced. And I resented my husband when I was pregnant and I couldn't explain to him why. I'm like, you can come and go as you please. Your body's not changing. Like you can still keep your life and your day to day just as you was. And I can't, especially farther into my pregnancy. And it wasn't any different after I had my son. What have been the things that you have noticed that has helped moms, not only necessarily postpartum, because is it fair to say that the identity shift and the identity crisis can last for some time?
Yes, absolutely. I do want to touch on one thing specific to that. And I think that you work a lot with professional women.
Yes.
I think this is important to note this, that a lot of times our partners, a non-pregnant partner, can go into work and, unless they're telling people like we're expecting a baby, no one even knows
Yeah.
necessarily. But it is undeniable when you're like 3 months or in your third trimester of pregnancy and you're waddling around with your pregnant belly, everybody knows that you are having a baby. And with some of the biases in the workplace towards working moms or working women, and then on top of that, she's pregnant, it's inevitable that some workplaces, unfortunately, women experience people going, are you even dedicated to being in this career? Are you still a team player? Are you going to leave us and go off somewhere else? And then, of course, I had this one time where people are like, okay, you're about to go on vacation. Well, it's not vacation. It's
Vacation.
leave. Thank you very much.
All the vacation, it gets me, it kills me. Yeah, vacation. Okay.
So, I think what you were talking about in terms of the transition. So, Nathalia, I think that at the end of the day, one of the ways in which we have parallels in what we do is that we are both in the business of change.
Yeah.
Where we believe people can change, but change comes with good and bad. It just does. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that what I like to do, my favorite position is to be in a space where women are looking at me and saying, hey, I'm about to be pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, or we're going to plan for pregnancy in the future. And we talk about these things that maybe people don't typically talk about. Hey, there's going to be a huge change. Let's talk about the ugly parts of it too. That it's okay. Like it's great, but it's also okay to say, I kind of miss sleeping 8 hours a night. Kind of miss being able to pack up and travel for a weekend or like even go down the street to Target without packing like, a whole truck full of things for this baby. So I think that the transition is inevitable. I think that some of the emotional challenges that come with the transition are inevitable. I just wish that people could be more honest and open about it. And it's not complaining. It's just you're allowed to have those emotions. And at least if we know that they're in front of us, we can kind of make that transition more seamless for moms.
I couldn't agree more. And another thing, tell me if you see this in your practice, because the more I have started, and you're right, I work with a lot of high achieving, like working moms, type A, like always being in control. And one thing that I have noticed is a pattern, is that they grieve or they mourn the control they once felt like they had. So before they could control, oh, I want to lose 2 pounds. And then they would do whatever extreme they had to do. And then they would lose the 2 pounds and their body would go back to where it was. Or, oh, I'm going to spend 2 hours in the gym. They had control over their schedule. And then a baby comes along and it's like cute. And they have all these plans. I'm going to have a birth that is going to be with the birds singing and the angels coming from the sky. And the baby's like, cute. And then you don't have that birth. And it's going to be like, oh, I'm going to breastfeed and it's going to be all breast fat. And then your body's like, nah, nope, that's not going to happen. So there is a lot of loss of control in the process of becoming a mom that I find that for a type A woman, for me, you was, and for a lot of the ladies that I work with, the biggest identity shift is letting go. How do you feel about this long-winded statement?
So yes, I term it a little differently. I call it mental flexibility is what I tell people.
I love that.
Mental flexibility to me means, we lay out plans and then our body's like, forget your plan. I don't really care. And your baby's like, I don't really care about your plan. And your breasts are like, I don't really feel like breastfeeding. And you're like, okay, well, I guess it's just me here. Like everybody else has a different set of plans. So I think that the idea here around mental flexibility is that a lot of moms will come to me when they're planning for a pregnancy and they're like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this perfect birth plan and it's going to be like this and it's going to be like that. And then also I'm going to breastfeed until my baby's 1.5 years old. No iPads. I'm talking about myself here. No iPads and, all of these things. And then what I will tell a lot of these moms is like, that's great. Let's talk about these plans and why they're important. But also let's talk about the idea that at the end of the day, you need to be healthy. Your baby needs to be healthy. Everything else is in the details. Let's talk about like what it means to give up this specific part of the birth plan, or what does it mean if you don't breastfeed, but your baby still gets adequate nutrition and your pediatrician's cool with how the baby's growing. Ultimately, that's the goal. So I think that that's one. So I do agree about the control piece, but giving permission to a woman to say, this was my plan. I'm sad that I can't stick with my plan, but maybe it's more important to roll with it because it's not all in my control is one thing. The other thing I'm going to tell you is postpartum. I find that a lot of professional moms are run by schedules, parameters, objective feedback, assessments, all these things, right? 8 to 5 with a lunch break or whatever it is. And then you have a baby and you're like, I don't even know if it's morning or night. Like
facts.
Right? Like, right? Are we breastfeeding? Did we just breastfeed like 3 minutes ago? Like what? Okay. And I don't even know how much I'm breastfeeding. Like, is my baby getting this much or this much? And, all these things. And nothing is linear. Nothing is easily objectively like measured. Like, do you pat yourself on the back by the number of poopy diapers you change? Like, how do you measure productivity at that point? It is crazy making for people.
Yeah, it is. That is so funny that you say that. And because it was literally, I got to the end of the day and I had nothing to show for.
Yeah.
I'm like, what have I done all day? And it's kind of like almost that feeling of, I felt unaccomplished, even though I had managed to keep a little person alive that I never even managed to keep a plant alive, let alone a child. And then I'm like, instead of patting myself on the back, it was always that striving for perfection on something that I didn't even know what a perfection looked like.
Yeah, that's right. You have to completely revamp your viewpoints of what it means to be successful in those postpartum days. And then the other thing I have to tell, I don't know why this is a thing. And it was true for me too. Everybody obsesses about the laundry.
Yes.
Literally, your plants are outside, the grass is turning brown, like nobody cares, right? Like,
but the laundry.
It's just the laundry. People are like, the laundry is piling up. And I mean, like, yeah, I haven't showered in 2 weeks. I don't know. Like, there's like dirty dishes in the sink, but who cares about all that? There's like 6 loads of laundry that need to be
yeah.
pressed over it.
Yeah, no, that is very true. So, and I see that a lot with the demographic that I work with, that loss of sense of control, mental flexibility goes all the way until when their kids are not just babies, because that aim for control, they keep on trying to grab back instead of just going with the flow, obviously having some kind of plan. And then they keep on going into extremes. And I'm saying this more from like a fitness standpoint. And I know that I can say this because we know each other from the gym. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, I'm going to train like 2 hours a day because they have these high standards of life, how life was. Mm-hmm. And then you struggle to have the flexibility to accept that life is going to be a little bit different. So whenever you come across a woman with this kind of mindset, that, in addition to everything that they did before, exactly how it was before, now they are going to be a full-time mom, a full-time worker, and then they're going to drop it like it's hot. They are going to have a 6-pack and work out 3.5 hours a day. How do you navigate this obsession? That's not going to be the right word, so you feel free to correct me, but this obsession with perfection to make sure that everything is, all the dots are in the I's at all costs, even if the cost is your sanity.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. Nathalia, we don't accidentally develop these sort of frameworks in our brain, right? We don't accidentally develop perfectionism. What happens with our brain is that, sometimes we're genetically or physiologically, mentally predisposed towards certain things, but then we often develop these frameworks and thought processes, like, say, perfectionism, over time, because we've tried different things. And at some point in our life that worked for us. It was what we call adaptive. And then what ends up happening is that your life changes and you're still trying to use that same template on your changed life, and it does not work anymore. And that's when we say it's kind of maladaptive at this point. So to say, I'm just going to keep approaching everything at this point, my life has drastically changed, but I'm going to continue to approach it the exact same way, It doesn't work. And it just feels like a exercise in futility. So one of the things I will do is I will literally go about this two different ways. Number one is I'll say exactly what I said to you just now, that we are trying to apply an old technique to a new life. And that the distress is coming from the fact that it's just not working. That doesn't work anymore. The maladaptiveness is the fact that we are using something that is outdated on something that has changed, is number one. But number two is that sometimes once you've built that level of trust, somebody looks at you and they lean into you and they trust you. And that to me, by the way, is gold, right? When someone trusts me, I'm like, oh my God, this is the ultimate source of change and growth for this person, is that they can trust me to help guide them to this next step. But someone trusts you, I will literally look at them and say, use these words. I'm going to give you the permission to let go of that. Here's the permission you need. You and I both know it's time to let go.
I love that. And 100%, I really honor the trust that I have from the ladies that I coach. One thing that I find challenging though, is that because oftentimes they are, and that's when I'm probably going to refer them out to you. They are so stuck on that. Okay, but this is the only way. This is the only way, that I have not even gained their trust to listen to the fact that, like, for example, I work with a lot of former competitors, training 3-4 hours a day, eating nothing but broccoli and freaking ice cubes. And then they have a child. They don't have 3.5 hours to go to the gym. They have birthday parties to go to. They want to have a more quote unquote normal life, but yeah, they keep on going back to old strategies, and then they feel like a failure. And then it's like, I am the problem. I'm broken. What is wrong? I'm not motivated. And the more they tell themselves, I'm not motivated. I can't be consistent. What's wrong? The more they start to believe it, and then it becomes that cycle. What is your approach when you get somebody before they trust you?
It is very challenging. I think that one of the pieces here is that sometimes people need to walk this path for change. And there's a lot of data on this. Sometimes, despite the fact that they're showing up to you and saying, hey, I want to change, some part of them, a big part of them, is just not ready for that.
True.
That's really challenging, because you can't force somebody into a change, even when they think they want it. At the end of the day, they have to be in a place where they are truly ready. Even if they think they're ready, they have to truly be ready. And so there's a lot of data on this. And so what happens then? I think that it would be easy enough to say, come back to me when you're ready to change. But
yeah,
the goal is to help somebody explore that path to get them to that space of readiness. And I think that when we talk about change, here's the thing, that there is the term that we call ambivalence. Some part of you is ready for a change, excited for a change. You can see that path forward, but some part of you wants to hold on to old ways and maybe is grieving the idea of letting go of what worked for you at some point. It was your friend, right? Working out for 3 hours a day. That's your best buddy. That was your companion at times where you needed it the most. And so we have to let go of those old habits, those old forms that served us at some point. And what I often do in that case, when people are not ready to make that next step, they're not ready to let go of that, or they're not ready to fully put their trust into that process, is that I will literally say, on one hand, this, I hear this, but on the other hand, this. And I literally put it out there and let their brain kind of simmer with that.
I love that. Again, you work with a lot of career women. I know that you work a lot with other fellow medical professionals. Nobody goes through med school without ambition and motivation and some level of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you navigate the moms that, are very career driven, and then they have the mom guilt because they're focusing on their career? And then what happens by default is that the first thing to go is themselves. So do you see what I'm saying? Kind of like, for example, they feel guilty because they're focusing and working, let's say 9 to 6. But they want to take care of themselves, but they feel guilty to take that time to take care of themselves because they don't want to be away from their kids. And then it just becomes that cycle of toxicity from what I have seen. Is this something that you are kind of experiencing in your practice as well, and seeing that kind of pattern, that the first thing to go is the self-care of the mother?
Oh yeah, 100%. Natalia, how many times have you seen, and you may have experienced this too, that moms will like make all this food and then their spouse gets fed, the kids get fed. And by the time mom gets to her coffee or food or whatever, it's cold. And they're like,
Yes.
okay, I have to eat this really quickly before it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even need to be edible. I'll just need to eat this.
Mhm.
Well, moms, like, I think societally, we are told that it's okay if we come last. The sacrifices need to be there because we can't make sacrifices in any other space. Okay. So I do think that this is where that stems from in a lot of ways. What my argument here is, now my mom's a surgeon. Okay. And I am going to tell you that I've lived this also, that looking at my mom, she was gone all the time. But when she would come home, I found that she just literally, she would take care of everything she needed to take care of. And in the time, even if it was an hour or just an hour and a half that she would spend with us in the evening, all in, she would really dedicate herself to spending time with us, to listening to us. And honestly, when I think back to my childhood, I don't think about the times that she wasn't there. That's what I remember. I remember the conversations we had and the good times we had. That's really what characterizes my memories of our time together. So one of the things I do want to say, going back to what you were saying earlier, with regards to moms sacrificing themselves, whether it's physically or mentally, and I think you and I would agree that there's really a fine line, if any line, between the two, right?
Yeah.
Health is health. Is that when your health drops, I think that you're really impacting the health of your family.
Yep.
There's really no clean separation between a mother and her child. There's no separation. When a child is born, and I have to think about this all the time because sometimes I have to medicate women who are struggling, say during their pregnancy. So I have to think about a mom and I have to think about a child. So a lot of times moms will come in and say, oh, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, I'm depressed. But at the end of the day, I'm okay taking that hit as long as my baby is okay. I don't want the baby to be exposed to medications or whatever. Well, guess what? Depression is a systemic disease. Your baby's getting exposed. Let's get this treated so the two of you can thrive together. And that's ultimately what this is. What I tell moms is take a step forward for yourself. But if that doesn't speak to you, here's the deal. When you take a step forward, your baby takes a step forward too.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and we're going to touch on the medication. That's kind of it's being on my brain. I just want to put the bow on this part of the conversation. So basically, what I'm hearing is that, and I would greatly agree with that, is that almost becomes counterproductive with the goal of being more present and spending more quality time with their family and kids. They let go of themselves, their physical health, which then by default is going to impact physical and emotional health, mental health, which by default is going to impact the very people that they're trying to be there for.
100%.
And how do you help a woman see that? Because it's so easy to have that guilt. Oh, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it, but I'd rather be there. So how do you help them see that being there for an hour at 100% is better than being there for 4 hours when you feel like dog shit? Excuse my French.
I think that there are several ways to do this. I think that number one is that to let go of the black and whiteness of it's not about I don't want to be with my kids. I do want to be with my kids right now, but I also have to prioritize my health, and you can feel both. That's okay, right? I would love to be with my kids right now, but I'm doing this right now because it's crucially important, is number one. But number two is I think that it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, when you separate out it's me, I'm choosing myself over my kids, that does not speak to people, to moms, right? So oftentimes I'll have to rope the kids' health into the conversation and say, when this happens, and I have a lot of data on this, when a mother is doing well from a mental health perspective, you are setting your children up for success. And there's so much data on what that means in terms of children long-term, in terms of professional, educationally, cognitively, socially, their own mental health, all of it. There's a lot of data on this short-term and longitudinally.
I love that. And I love that you come with the data. I love me. I have the receipts, and she has the receipts, folks. I love it. So you spoke about medication, and I know that talking about medication actually mental health medication is taboo all around because I was diagnosed with ADHD. And God forbid I talk about my medication. That's actually something that I don't talk often on my social media platforms because I just do not have the patience nor bandwidth to deal with the comments of people that don't understand because they cannot see it. So there is a lot of taboo, even without being pregnant and breastfeeding. And I know before I ask this question, I know from listening to you and knowing you that you're very holistic when it comes to your approach to mental health. And with your first child, you were actually the person who wanted to eat everything organic, if I heard it correctly in another interview that you've done. So can you talk to me a little bit about medication during pregnancy, after pregnancy, when breastfeeding, and just as a whole for mental health?
It's a broad topic. And again, if we
Yes.
have another 6 hours, I can answer all the questions. But my broad overview here is that some women, at the end of the day, when we look at medication, whether it's during pregnancy, breastfeeding, or otherwise, the reality is that we drive our decisions based off medical necessity. So the reality is that people don't come to see me for fun, right? People come to see me because they're suffering or because they're struggling with whatever mental health condition. And oftentimes, by the time women have come to see me, they've tried everything. They have tried to do it on their own. They've tried with the exercise and the lifestyle changes, and they have tried with maybe some therapy. They've tried sticking it out. They tried to be strong. They've tried all these things. And we're talking about women who are very capable, strong women who finally come in and they say, I am struggling. I just need some help. And what I have found is that we have an opportunity to be conservative a lot of the times with medications. Sometimes people feel like when you come in and you're asking for help, medication wise, medically, whatever it is, that you are relinquishing control when in fact you're forming a partnership with someone who's looking in saying, something is off from a medical standpoint. Let's kind of tap into modern sciences, even to a conservative degree, and get you the help that you need. Now, when women are pregnant, there are several medications that we have studied over a period of time. What that means is that we've studied them during a pregnancy, postpartum, and even after giving birth, during delivery and after birth and all of that, and looking at the babies and how they look like, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And the data really supports that women should have mental health treatment during pregnancy and postpartum. That's the single best thing. That may or may not include medications. And if you have a doctor who has knowledge and experience treating with medications during pregnancy, they can kind of guide you with what is generally considered acceptable and safe during pregnancy and breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you did mention, because I think that is a bit of most people's concern, because there are doctors that might not necessarily align with your line of thinking when it comes to, making sure that they've always also tried exercising. They've also tried doing other avenues that they come straight with medication. So I really appreciate the fact that you did mention they've tried exercising. They've tried this, because I'm not a doctor, friends. She is, not me. But is it fair to say that exercising and having a purpose in life, sometimes outside of your children, can help with the mental health aspect in addition to the medication, opposed to just the medication alone?
Absolutely, in a million different ways. But one of the things that we have seen is that exercise can be a really important piece of our mental health regimen. There's some people where when we're creating a mental health treatment strategy, exercise is an integral part of that. And we've also found that exercise for people who have recurrent depressive episodes can often help to keep their depression in remission, is what we call it, meaning like in between episodes, it can kind of protect them and keep their depression at bay.
I love that. And how do you deal as a mental, and this is like just me being nosy, and I don't know if you can talk about this, but how do you deal as a medical professional with the taboo around mental health medication? Because even for me to get myself in medication for my ADHD, I almost like had to have a pep talk with myself because there's so much taboo with it. And I was almost a bit reluctant when the doctor suggested. I'm like, no, I don't need that. And I'm like, well, I kind of need it because I'm struggling, man. But
Mhm.
how do you navigate that as a medical professional?
Well, it's a good question. I think that I didn't with my firstborn, which is why I went into this field in the first place, that it was a pretty deep, dark hole after I had my first child. And I think that it really clashed with my notion that I am capable and strong and able to heal myself because I'm so smart and I'm so this and I'm so that. And it doesn't really matter if you're struggling, you're struggling. One of my mentors looked at me and said, "Are you saying you're too good for treatment? Because then what are you saying about other people who need treatment? Either treatment is something you believe in or it's not." And I think at that point I had to say, I need to be a little bit more open-minded about this. So I contend a lot with this on a daily basis for my professional patients, and in particular, say my female patients who are really strong and smart and capable, who come to me with the same thing. I thought I was smarter than this. I thought I was stronger than this. And I'll have to tell them, you need to let it go, right? Like if you have a medical need for this, we just need to be open to the idea that sometimes people need treatment.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I've seen you make posts in the past, and we like that's kind of whenever Kyle, by the way, we have the same trainer, and that's kind of how we met. And then Kyle told me about your work, and I start creeping on your Instagram, and I saw a post that you made about breastfeeding and mental health. And we got talking about it because, again, going back to the need for control or like to control the variables. People are like, oh, I'm going to breastfeed. And even if breastfeeding comes at any cost. So, and you have, can you tell me a little bit about the data available when it comes to breastfeeding and mental health and what moms can, should, would do when it comes to making sure that everybody's on the same page and sane and doing well?
It is, it's complex. So breastfeeding is one of those things where, yes, many women choose to breastfeed, but what can happen is there's a struggle around when women are saying, I absolutely have to breastfeed. It's the only way to feed a child. And it's the only right thing to do for your child. I think that that is where the challenge is because to your point, sometimes your breasts are like, I'm not going to do this. Sometimes your baby's like, I'm not going to do this. And I had that challenge with my firstborn, where speaking of a cost associated with this, I paid for all these lactation consultants when I was a resident, and residents don't make any money, right? So, at least back then, right? So I was trying to pay for all these lactation consultants, and every single one of them was like, I've never had a baby not breastfeed after I have I have my magic touch on them or whatever. And this kid would not breastfeed. He just refused. He wouldn't do it. And I thought that I was harming him. I thought I was the world's worst mother. I've seen so many women who come in with feelings of guilt and they feel like failures because they cannot breastfeed this child for whatever reason. I'm going to tell you, this child and I are so bonded. He's almost 10 now and he's got shiny hair. He's formula fed. It's great.
He got shiny hair. Oh, I'm busy of that. I love it. But then you breastfed your second.
I breastfed my second. And so this is what I often tell people. I have three. So my second one is fully breastfed. And my third one was half and half. I cut my maternity leave short so I could go back to work. And so she was only breastfed for a while and then she was formula fed. And they're all fine. They're all healthy. They're good kids. We're all equally bonded. They're all like, smart, sometimes snotty kids, but there's no difference amongst them. And the pediatrician was like, it's fine. It's fine. You're doing okay. Baby's doing okay. They're growing. Everything's okay. So I think that from when it comes to breastfeeding, we've heard some data periodically around, oh, breastfeeding is really good for mental health. Yeah, maybe until it isn't. I find that a lot of times women will put so much pressure on themselves to breastfeed. And I've actually heard more recently people talking about how breastfeeding, like this pressure to breastfeed and pump was so extreme that it impacted their ability to bond with their baby. I think it's a case by case basis. And I think that you really have to take a step back at some point and reassess, is what I'm doing working?
I love that you say that. And again, because I work with moms, as you know, and like yourself, we have a range of moms. What they have in common is that they're very type A driven women. So the ones that are breastfeeding, it's almost like whenever I ask, because I need to know that information for the nutritional background of things. And I'm like, so are you breastfeeding? And they're like, no, I'm not, but they almost feel the need to explain themselves because there is this societal pressure that, what kind of mother you are if you're not breastfeeding. And I almost have to be like, girl, I'm not emotionally attached to it one bit. I hated it. I did not enjoy breastfeeding at all. I did not like that feeling of not owning my body after not owning my body for goodness know how long with pregnancy, 2 pregnancies in 14 months. I'm like, nope, everybody get off me. But the need to constantly explain, it's crazy.
Oh, yes. It's interesting that you say that because a lot of times when I am thinking about what kind of treatment somebody needs, I'll ask them, are you breastfeeding or pumping? And people will often look at me and say, I'm not breastfeeding. And then look at me expectantly. And I will always say, oh, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Does your pediatrician care? And pretty much 99% of the time, they're like, no, pediatrician's happy with how the baby's growing. Yeah. And I don't care. I have no opinion. Let's move on.
100%. And that's funny because I had a lot of pressure from my mom. My mom drove me insane. You're going to stop breastfeeding the child. And I'm like, and I was so done. I was so done with the whole thing. And I had Demir. I don't know if you ever heard of Demir. Demir is, it's very rare actually. But it's whenever you have like an incredible feeling of sadness take over you, whenever you have the letdown.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yep.
And so every time, like I dreaded it. So it was the pressure was hard. So Aparna, I heard you say something that rung so true to me. I almost felt attacked. What you said was having a child, a baby can expose the cracks that were already there, but we weren't paying attention. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that for me with my ADHD, because all my coping mechanisms to manage my ADHD symptoms were just for me. And then you add 2 kids to the mix and a husband and a business. And that's like the house of cards kind of fell. And that's kind of what I realized. Do you see it often, women learning about mental health struggles that they've had in the past, but they were able to mask? And then kids came along and they were like, cute, hold my beer, and then just opened the can of worms?
1,000%. And where I see that a lot of times is women will come in and say, oh, I'm feeling this way. And then I've never felt this way before. And then you push them a little bit, come to realize they're like, wait, but actually, wait a minute, there was this one time. Oh, wait, there was this other time. And then what happens a lot of times is they start treatment and they feel better than they ever have in their whole life. They're trying to restore themselves to a past self that maybe didn't work well for them even then. And now instead of, and a lot of times people get so fixated on, I just want to go back to where I was, but we're not there anymore. Let's move forward. But when we move forward, sometimes we hit a new baseline that is higher than we've ever been. And that I think is because we recognize the places that we struggled before, but we were able to compensate for them. Maybe we had the time, the energy, the stakes weren't as high back then. Now they are. And with treatment, a lot of times, and a different mindset, a different approach, people feel like they can kind of elevate themselves to a greater level.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more when you said get to where they were before. And that's something that I tell even the ladies that come to me, I want to get back to where I was before pregnancy, physically speaking. And I'm like, well, but what if you can be better? Mm-hmm. What if like the new you is better than the old you? How long would it be considered postpartum depression and anxiety? And can it just like linger because you went untreated and then it just becomes the person's new baseline, like you were talking about?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do see that. So I think that really all signs point to getting treated when it occurs. When you really start to struggle, you want to get in and get treated right away. Because I think that depression or any chronic condition can kind of become resistant to some point. It just kind of sits there after a while. It just is like, well, now I'm here. I don't see any reason to leave. So it can kind of become chronic at some point until you get treatment. But at that point, different other things have happened. So depression or whatever mental health condition has a way of spilling over into other areas of your life. So your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your children, your productivity at work, and whatever it is, right? Your other areas of health. And then you're dealing with more than just the depression. And you have other areas of your life that have sort of shifted and changed dynamically as a result of untreated or undertreated medical and or mental health. I have seen this where I have had women who have come in after their kids are already teenagers, early 20s, and they were like, you know what? No one in my family believes in getting mental health treatment, but I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And then you come to find out they had kids 20 years ago. They had postpartum depression, never got it treated, and it never went away.
Uh-huh.
So it's possible that it will remit by itself, but we also know that treatment works and it's rapidly effective. So why wouldn't you do that so you could just move on with your best life?
I thought it was very interesting that you said that it can spill into your relationships because, you know, you're talking about depression, but I experienced like significant perinatal and postnatal anxiety. I will never forget. We lived in Ireland when I was pregnant with my son, and then we were doing my maternity shoot like on the top of a mountain, and I could not relax. My husband was walking on the mountain, and the only thing that I could see was him falling off the cliff. But he was like, I'm like, don't walk there. But it was something that literally took over my whole body. It's so hard to explain. And I could see that also spilling over after I had the baby. And then one day my husband literally had to look at me and be like, he's my son too. What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to kill the child. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of when it clicked for me. But I find that a lot of men would not have said what my husband did. They would just kind of like let it go. Is that kind of what you're talking about whenever you start to spilling into relationships, that it can even become to a point that the mother doesn't allow the father to be a father because she's so protective over the baby?
Yeah, you know, earlier you had said something, I never responded to this, but you had said postpartum OCD, which is in a lot of times manifests as like that mama bear sort of tendency, but it kind of overshoots and then it becomes obsessive. This idea that it just takes over and you can't stop these looping thoughts that something horrible is going to happen. And I find that it's not just postpartum OCD, it's a lot of mental health stuff perinatally will impact our ability to adequately bond with our child or kind of start off your like, you know, the parenthood journey with your partner or whomever in a certain way. For example, like what you were talking about with your husband, holding your child and being fearful that something bad was going to happen. I hear about that kind of thing all the time. Or, you know, the grandparents who just are doting on this new baby and the mom just like, she can't let go of the idea of like, no, if you do it this way, the baby's going to get hurt or the baby's not going to be healthy or whatever. And a lot of the family members are like, you know, we've had children. It's okay.
Yeah.
We know how to do this. But it's not that the mother is necessarily being difficult. She's not trying to be difficult. It's just that sometimes we get stuck in these certain ways of being, and it's hard to step outside of ourselves enough to see how it's impacting those relationships.
I love that you said this, and this is going to be my last question because I want to be respectful of your time. It is very normalized, the mama bear kind of behavior. But at what point because I see this all the time, women losing themselves in the role of mom and forgetting that they are a wife, forgetting that they are, that they have a career and, you know, just getting so set in that one role and being overprotective and not letting anybody else come into that cocoon. At what point is this and kind of going back to that first question, at what point is this something that, because society normalizes, at what point do people look for help?
I think that when it starts to deeply impact the health of the relationship, I think that when the woman can see that it is actually hurting themselves mentally or impacting their ability to bond with the baby or function, I think is like a really big piece. That's where you go from just sort of like, oh, I'm just sort of protective of the baby into what we call disorder territory is when it starts to impact functioning. That's a really broad term.
Yeah.
But I think that you take that and individualize it to each situation. And for example, like I will find a lot of women will look at their husbands and say, he's not an equal partner. But sometimes in those cases, it's because she feels this need to protect the baby and thinks very rigidly about the only way to do it and doesn't feel safe letting anybody else in.
Yeah. And you're almost like enabling your partner to be like to do nothing. And then by the time that they do ask for help, the child is already like 7 or 8 and the husband or partner has gotten away with doing nothing for 7 or 8 years. And then the woman is like, you do nothing. Well, I've been here the whole time and you haven't let me do anything.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it is that you can see dynamic shifts in the partnership early on that just continue to go unchecked. And then that creates the foundation, the new foundation for the relationship going forward. Absolutely. That can happen.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, because that's something that I even pay attention. And sometimes I'm like, am I the problem? Am I the one that because I'll be in Facebook groups and these women are talking about not being on a date night with their husbands for I don't know, since they had their kids 6 because they don't trust anybody to watch their kids. How do you not go on a date night with your husband for 6, 7, 8 years? And because it is a big part of being a couple, because you don't trust anybody, even if it is family, to watch your kids. So is that what we're talking about? That whenever it starts to impact the relationship, is that what you mean?
You know, it's so interesting you say that. In some ways, I feel like I've lived this as well. Being a psychiatrist, I think that it's really important. I find that safety and stability, of course, are really important. I probably have a high bar for that. And so in looking for childcare for my own kids, it was hard for me to kind of let go and say, okay, I can trust the situation. I can trust these people with watching my children for long enough for me and my spouse to get away for, an evening or whatever it is. But I think that it's important, kind of going back to what we said before, that, the health of a child is dependent on a number of things. Living in a healthy, happy, stable home and being raised by parents who feel happy and connected is also important. Having a disconnected, unhappy marriage doesn't really support the proper development of a child as well.
I love that. That's very much how we think. I tell my husband even that I think our marriage comes before our kids, because if we have a shady marriage, the kids are going to be growing up in a shady environment. I love that. Aparna, thank you so much for your time. You've been so incredibly generous. Can you please tell us and our listeners where is the best way for them to find you? And if they have any questions about anything, if they can send you a message, if they want to see you as their healthcare provider, if they can go check you out in Frisco, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Well, they can always find me on Instagram. I think that would be the easiest way. It's Aparna Iyer, MD, or my website is drapernaiyer.com. That's the easiest way to kind of stay connected with me and to kind of see what's going on latest in terms of my practice and some of the stuff that I've been talking about.
I love it. And I'll put all of those links on my show notes as well, so people can click directly. And I just want to commend you before I let you go that I'm loving the content that you're putting out on your social media. It's been very helpful, very well thought out. I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing.
Thank you. I appreciate, I'm so glad to hear that, because a lot of thought goes into it. We want to be really careful and inclusive, but also really want to speak to a broad spectrum of people with a variety of different motherhood experiences. So that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing. Well, Aparna, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in the gym. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment or voice message at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on Instagram and let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. As for today, this is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.